My name is Susan Wainio, and I am Lauren's grandmother. I'm a former history teacher. I've been married to my husband for 46 years. We have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. I know Lauren wanted me to talk about some events in my life that have had an impact on me. The first one I wanted to talk about was television. As a matter of fact, my parents were the first people in our town of Rochester, Massachusetts, to buy a TV. And everybody wanted to babysit for us. Television obviously has had a huge impact on our lives. We have gotten educational programs from there, entertainment, but today we're able to keep in touch throughout the world with all kinds of events almost immediately. I'll give you an example. When I was 10 years old, Princess Margaret of England got married, and we could not watch her wedding live. We had to wait until some film was flown across the Atlantic from England to New York City before it could be broadcast on TV. Another event I wanted to talk about was the space race. When I was in the 2nd grade, the Russians launched a satellite called Sputnik into space. And this alarmed the people in the United States a great deal because the Russians were our enemy. And I do remember going out on the front lawn when I was in 2nd grade, and we could actually see Sputnik as it traveled across the sky. It just looked like a little moving star that moved along the skyline. Then it was time for man to get into space, and the Russians beat us there too. 3 weeks later, on May 5th, 1961, American Alan Shepard became the first American in space, and we watched that in our classroom. I was in the 5th grade, and we watched it in school. And every time there was going to be a space launch, it was broadcast live on TV. Television stations would cover it live for hours and hours. It was very exciting. And in 1969, July, Neil Armstrong became the first American to walk on the moon. And the Russians never did make it to the moon, but the Americans did. And this is my autograph picture of Neil Armstrong. My brother Logan worked at NASA in Washington, D.C., and for a while Neil Armstrong worked there with him, and he was able to get his autograph for me at that time. Next thing I wanted to talk about basically was President Kennedy and his administration and his assassination, which impacted me personally because I really liked JFK, and he used to summer down in Hyannis, Massachusetts, Hyannisport, and my cousins lived down there. And I used to have Kennedy scrapbooks. I would cut out all these stories, particularly about his wife Jackie, whom I really admired a great deal. In the summer of 1963, I stayed with my aunt down in Hyannis, and she took me to church. St. Francis Xavier was also where President Kennedy went to church, and I sat right across from him in the church, watched him continuously during the Mass. And then the following summer, after he had been assassinated, his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, and their son, John Jr., came over and sat on the beach blanket down at the Hyannisport Beach Club with my cousin and I, and she chatted for a little bit there. But when he was assassinated, it was a very tragic time. It was a sad time, and it was something that we could watch on TV live as events unfolded during the weekend after he had been killed. And the final thing I thought I'd talk about today was Vietnam. Vietnam certainly played a big role in my teenage years, high school and college as well. And at first the war was very popular. People supported it because we thought it was being fought to stop the spread of communism throughout the world. And gradually, though, as so many young men were going off to war and being killed and no progress was being made, a lot of people lost support for the war, and particularly young people. And when I was in the 11th grade, when I was 16, my brother was drafted into the service. He was 25 years old. He had been to college. He worked for the Department of Defense down in Washington, D.C. when he was drafted. He did say that many young people who went to Vietnam with him were mainly 18-year-olds, and not well educated, and he felt badly that they were so young and being involved in the war. He went over on a troop ship across the Pacific, and he said some of the young men did not want to go and actually jumped off the ship on the way over. My brother was there for about 2 months before he was severely wounded in his hand, and a bullet went in the palm of his hand and traveled up his arm and split it all open. And he had to lie in a rice paddy for several hours. And the Viet Cong, who was the enemy, came and checked on him, and they thought he was dead, so they left him alone. And eventually helicopters came in and transported my brother out of the rice paddy. The wound bothered him, actually. He had several operations, spent a lot of time in the hospital, and it did bother him for the rest of his life. He has since passed away. When I was in college, we protested against the Vietnam War after the shootings at Kent State University. Schools throughout the country protested, with students walking out of their classes, and many schools and universities shut down early that year. So I certainly have lots of other things I could talk about, but I think those are the highlights, and I think I've taken enough of your time. So thank you.